was one of the most feared, high-performance weapons of the 20th century. When it appeared in the skies over Korea, it sent the unsuspecting West spiraling into a state of shock. It was the Russian-made MiG-15.
We were at full throttle, doing as fast as we could go, and we were barely keeping up with it.
Until the arrival of the American F86 Sabre, the Russian jet outclassed everything in the sky, astonishing American pilots with its lightning maneuverability and intense firepower.
We could hit the MiG a number of times, and the MiG wouldn't necessarily go down. But if the MiG hit an F86 with those cannons, the F86 was not going to make it home.
But under the umbrella of the Cold War, this deadly game of aerial combat held a dark secret that threatened to throw the world into nuclear war. Using unique Soviet archive film and color reenactments, heavy metal enters the secret world of the MiG-15. Russia in the 1920s was a country of turmoil, revolution, and change. Stalin's reign of terror permeated every aspect of life in the Soviet Union. Soviet aircraft designers lived in a world of secrecy and fear. Although well behind the West, Soviet designers were actively experimenting with advanced technology. But by the late 1930s, much of this innovative work would never see the light of day. Aircraft designers knew that to fail could mean banishment to a labor camp in Siberia or a bullet in the back of the head.
You were living under an administration which was happy to shoot large numbers of engineers or anybody else on simple whims, political whims or whatever. And so there was an atmosphere that really is very difficult for people in the West to understand.
Stalin astonished the world in August 1939 by signing a non-aggression pact with Germany. When his top engineer discovered that the German Me-109 fighter was far superior to anything in the Soviet Union, Stalin flew into a rage. Nikolai Polikarpov, his chief designer, immediately fell out of favor as too old and staid. Stalin began to search for a younger and more dynamic team. He selected a young designer named Artem Mikoyan to head a new design bureau and tapped Mikhail Goryevich as his deputy.
Artem
Ivanovich was of course a designer, but an exceptional organizer too. He was the ideas man, whereas Goryevich was someone who was very good at detail and fine-tuning the designs.
Artem Mikoyan was from Armenia, the son of a carpenter. He had trained as a pilot in the Soviet Air Force and later became an engineer. His brother was on Stalin's Council of Ministers. By 1937, he had joined the main Soviet design bureau led by Polikarpov. Here he worked on several successful aircraft designs. Now he would replace his boss and lead the Soviet Union into the jet age. Mikhail Goryevich was a Ukrainian. He trained as an engineer, and after the revolution became an aircraft designer in Moscow. Here he met Mikoyan and they became good friends.
Goryevich liked Artem Mikoyan a lot. He was perfectly happy to be his deputy. They were both kind and decent people, and that's also why they worked so well together.
The motto of the new experimental bureau was speed and altitude. All their future aircraft designs would be known as MiGs, after the combination of its creators' names. It was the start of a partnership that would be associated around the world with successful aircraft for decades. Then, in June 1941, Hitler launched his surprise offensive against the Soviet Union. Stalin's Air Force was totally unprepared and ill-equipped to fight the modern German fighters. Russian losses were massive. Final victory over the Nazi war machine was largely due to the remarkable success of the Red Army. The Soviet Air Force was left in the Dark Ages. By the end of the war, tensions that would soon turn into the Cold War began to grow. The Allies now had the jet engine, space rockets, and the atom bomb. Soviet designers needed to catch up, and catch up fast.
Stalin was furious that the Soviet Union's technology had fallen behind that of the West, and he told his designers to bridge the gap. Not an easy task, and Stalin wasn't the sort of man that you argued with, but in one respect, Soviet technicians did have an advantage. They'd captured a lot of German technology, amongst it the German ME-262 jet fighter, and they were able to build on this, to build their own jet at what was the beginning of the atomic age.
The Mikoyan and Goryevich team took advantage of this captured technology and began to develop a new jet fighter, the MiG-9.
Первоначально проект MiG-9 предусматривал расположение двигателей как...
At first it was planned with MiG-9 to put the engines in the same place as the ME-262.
Решение от этого отказались.
But later on a different decision was made, and the engines were placed in the fuselage, which was recognized to be more effective. Tests proved that this was the correct decision.
In April 1946, fitted with two German BMW jet engines, the MiG-9 was the Soviet Union's first prototype jet ever to fly. At high speeds, bailing out would now become sheer suicide, so the first ejection seat in the USSR was successfully tested. It was just one of the jet age's many design problems that had to be solved.
They realized in order to reach high speed, close to the speed of sound, they needed a new arrow-shaped wing. That wing would push back the shock wave and air resistance in order to achieve much higher speeds.
The design and transition from a straight wing to a swept back wing was to give the MiG its most famous characteristic. Now, with the cigar-shaped fuselage and swept wings, all the jet fighter needed was a much more powerful engine.
The problem with the ME-262 engine, which the Germans had run into and was the major factor in its late appearance in the war, was how do you make a turbine blade stay on the turbine given the kinds of pressures you're putting on a jet engine? And that was a problem which the Soviets were not capable of solving.
At this crucial moment, the new post-war British government, as part of a trade agreement, invited Mikoyan and a Soviet delegation to visit the British Rolls-Royce engine factory. For the Russians, it was a potential gold mine, access to the latest Rolls-Royce jet technology. Stalin reacted with typical suspicion, asking, what fool would sell us his secrets? On arrival in July 1946, Mikoyan and the Soviet delegation were welcomed with typical British hospitality.
He was invited to the house of one of the Rolls-Royce bosses, and they played English billiards. Artem played billiards well. I know, because I played billiards with him many times. He'd lost one game and then offered a challenge and said, let's play another game, and if I win, you sell us your jet engines.
It was a close game, but the Russians won. Bizarrely, the future course of the MiG was settled across the green felt of an English pool table. Mikoyan had beaten the British at their own game. He had won the famous Rolls-Royce jet engine on a bet.
It sounds like an anecdote, but he told me that this was true.